Hello, this is Chip from 5th Edition Visions, and I'm here to talk about a book that I am not afraid to bring to my Magic the Gathering tournaments and events and pre-releases. Now, I do bring decks to play with other people during downtime between matches, before and after, but I also bring a book to read, and I notice that makes me a little bit different than some of the other gentlemen that populate my comic book store or my local card store. But I enjoy doing it because I love reading. And I want to talk about a book that I'm reading now that I love and I enjoy, and you might enjoy it, but I'm also going to tie it into Magic the Gathering because this channel is about Magic the Gathering. So if I speak about something, we need to link it back to the grandest card game that is out there today. So you can see the picture of the book right there on your screen. It is called Updike, and it's a biography about the late author John Updike by Adam Bagley. Okay, so this came out, I believe, in 2014. And if you are not familiar with John Updike, he is an extremely prolific American author. He was rumored many times to be the recipient of the Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, that never panned out, but he was frequently in the running for it. Now, what did John Updike write about? Was he a fantasy author? Science fiction? Romance? No. John Updike, well, he wrote about everything, but he had a very large style. But he wrote predominantly about America, about the American middle class experience. And there's certain things that he touched upon frequently in his work. He often wrote about adultery, which, you know, he knew from experience, which I don't think is something he should be particularly proud of. But he also wrote about the change in America, the way that the average American middle-class white male saw things unfold, which is oftentimes a character who is a stand-in for John Updike himself. John Updike believed that the truth, artfully rearranged, often made great fiction. And many readers and critics agreed. So what am I learning about John Updike here, and how does he tie to Magic the Gathering? Well, let's imagine that John Updike was a Planeswalker, that when he died in 2009 of lung cancer because he smoked throughout his life, that his spark ignited, turned into a Planeswalker. Well, what color Planeswalker would he be? Well, I would contend that John Updike, Planeswalker, author extraordinaire, would be green-white. Why? Well, let's consider this. John Updike was a very prolific author. He wrote 50-odd books. He made it a goal to write 3 pages of text every single day. He would write a novel, then a book of short stories, a book of criticism, and then a novel again, and short stories. He was always writing. His creative well never seemed to run dry. So that constant literary output, I would certainly say, is green. He's able to continually produce new things, generate new ideas, new characters, new life. And that definitely goes with green. Also, his eagerness to meet other people, even though it ended his marriage, I would certainly say is a green thing. He could not be contained. He liked to network and socialize, and many of those people were women. Okay, I would say that that is a green color. Now, why white? Well, white is a color of community, of stability, of staying in your place and doing the thing that you're supposed to do. Now, John Updike, when he was, really gaining traction in the 1960s, it was kind of unpopular for a writer like him to not be aggressively opposed to the Vietnam War. He wrote a piece called, I believe, On Not Being a Dove, where he talks about his quiet support for the Vietnam War, or at least not opposing it. And that essay kind of, wasn't super well received. It was kind of John Updike stepping into politics, which really wasn't his forte. His forte was writing fiction. But it shows that he supported the community. He supported America. He wanted, that stability, that small town stability, which we learn about in his biography. That was important to him. And I would say that that's a white color. Again, and also he was consistent and steady in doing his duties. So he was green in creating a whole bunch of works of literature, but his consistent and steady output on it, being reliable, reliably publishing a book a year, I think that that's a very white thing. So let's learn about his life just a little bit for those of you who are interested. And I do hope that you pick up this book and learn more about this author because I think he's great. And I worry because there's this constant weeding going on in the literary canon. If we even have a literary canon anymore now, a canon is that collection of books, those collection of authors that people say you need to read to be an educated person. Okay, so Shakespeare's obviously in there. Shakespeare's probably not going anywhere. And then you have other American authors like Mark Twain, So John Updike, he's a person that, people know about now, but in 50 years, will people still be reading about him? We don't know, but I would hope that people will be, and maybe this short little video might get some Magic the Gathering players, which would be an uncommon, support group, might champion him just a little bit, because you could read this biography, or I would recommend reading some of his books, which we'll discuss as I go on about his life, okay? So, imagine when John Updike was born, he was born in Pennsylvania, and in the 1920s, I think. I don't have the book in front of me, but he was born young. He was a young man during World War II. Okay, he didn't get to fight in World War II, but he came of age at the time when, America was doing great. We had just won the war, and so because of that, there was great national pride, there was great economic prosperity, there's a lot of upward mobility, a lot of modern conveniences. It was just a great time to be alive. Now, John Updike was an only child. If you've seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you know how Charlie Bucket lives? He lives with his mom, and then it's like 2 sets of grandparents who's just surrounded by all these adults. That was John Updike, okay? He was an only child, and he lived with a lot of adults, his parents and his grandparents. And his mother had literary ambitions. His father was a high school math teacher, and his mother went to an Ivy League school, and she wanted to be a novelist, and she wanted her son to likewise to do that. She wasn't able to quite succeed at that, and she wanted her son to be. So much so that she encouraged his reading and his development, and that when he became the age of about a teenager, she did not want her son to get trapped in the small Pennsylvania town in which they lived. He didn't want him to marry some high school girl and settle down and not achieve his greatness, which she foresaw in him. So she picked up young John Updike and the rest of the family and moved out to a small farmhouse. And there he spent the rest of his teenage years and his formative years. And he kind of resented that, because he was aware of what his mother was doing. But it did kind of keep him out of trouble, and it allowed him to focus on his academics and develop in his writing. Now, as he read, as he wasn't quite a farm boy because his parents were well educated, but he was what you might call, from the New York literary scene, an outsider or a hillbilly or a hick. Not really a hillbilly, he's not from the South, but he was from the country. But he did subscribe to the New Yorker magazine, which is a terrific magazine, New Yorker fiction, and it talks all about cosmopolitan stuff. And in the 1950s, people who were middle class and middle brow or striving to be highbrow, well, they read the New Yorker. And John Updike, he read that all the time as a young man. He wanted to be a cartoonist. There are cartoons, political cartoons, clever, whimsical sketches in the New Yorker. He wanted to be a cartoonist. He also wanted to be an author, but the New Yorker was his beacon. Okay, so when he goes to Harvard, because he's a fantastic lad like that, and he does well, what he ends up doing is that he writes stories and he develops his writing talents, and he, makes connections, so that ultimately, seamlessly, when he graduates, he gets stories accepted by the New Yorker. He gets a job to him offered by the New Yorker magazine. And he goes forth, and he almost seamlessly then just gets to, it seems effortless, even though he did work hard, but then he just steps right in the New Yorker, starts creating lots of stories for the New Yorker. They're well received. The magazine loves him. And he just launches right on his career, just very, very steady. It's just almost like this flower just blooming like clockwork. And again, that's why I would say John Updike certainly has that green color to him. Okay, so through all of this, he gets married and he has children. And, he grows up. I haven't finished the biography yet, but I do know a lot about his life. But the novel that I'll close talking about that, really launched him into fame is a novel called Rabbit Run. Okay, now Rabbit Run was written partially in response to Jack Kerouac's On the Road, which is a novel about cutting loose, leaving your responsibilities, road trip, #road trip, and doing all this fun stuff and listening to jazz, which was really cool in the 1950s. And cutting loose. And John Updike, as a family man, he kind of resented that. He wanted to show how if you walk away from your family to go, find this liberation and freedom, the people who are left behind get hurt. Hey, that's kind of a white thing, don't you think? That not white isn't Caucasian. That's white in Magic the Gathering. That's a white color. Okay? So to stay, at home and to do what you're supposed to do and fulfill your responsibilities. So Rabbit Run is about this ex-basketball player, this ex-high school basketball player who was really fantastic in high school. He was the ace. He was the star. And now that he's graduated high school and he has a dead-end job and he has a wife who's slightly annoying and he has a young baby, he feels trapped. He feels second-rate. So he tries to run away. You know, he tries to have that road trip and just find that he calls it, find that freedom. And I won't give away the book, but him doing so has devastating consequences for him and his family. But what made Rabbit Run so great was that it was written in the present tense. So it's almost, he was thinking about authoring the book as Rabbit Run, a movie. Because it was written in the present tense, a very rare thing. So it's like Rabbit, which is his nickname. His real name is Harold or Harry. So it's like Rabbit is playing basketball. He looks to his left and sees his wife, Janice, you know, coming up to him. So it's all written in the present tense, which was very neat, a unique style choice. But it resonated with Americans because of the subject matter, this idea of wanting to have it, but you can't always have that. And if you chase after it, sometimes, people get hurt. And it was very sexually frank at the time, meaning that, it's rather tame by today's standards. But in the 1950s, to be publishing something like that, where it's talking about rabbits, adventures, they had to edit it. They had to cut some stuff out to make sure that people wouldn't be sued, okay? But the great part about Rabbit Run is that then, 10 years later, he wrote a sequel called Rabbit Redux, or Rabbit Redo. Okay, and then after that, 10 years later, he wrote another novel called Rabbit is Rich. And then 10 years after that, he wrote another novel called Rabbit at Rest. And then 10 years after that, in the 1990s, he published a small novella called Rabbit Remembered. Now, what's great about all these novels is that so you see this American everyman go through this character arc over the course of 4 decades of American life. And as Updike writes about it, he's capturing all of these great things that are going on in America. Some of them are great, some of them are not great, but he's writing about the TV commercials he sees, the sporting events that are happening, the things that are going on in the news. So each novel is this really great time capsule of current events and popular culture going on at the time, seen through the eyes of Harry Angstrom, of Rabbit, who is just intelligent enough, as they say, to recognize his own insignificance, okay? So those are great books. I love them, but John Updike has written plenty others. Pick them up. Read Rabbit Run. Read a book of poetry by John Updike, criticism, whatever you want. Or just read books, because books are great. So sometimes you just don't need to play that extra modern match at MTG, Friday Night Magic. Maybe you should just pick up a book sometimes between matches. I find it fulfilling. But if you listen this far, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Have you read John Updike? What are your thoughts about John Updike? Would you say he is green or white? And after that, what books do you prefer to read, if any, at Magic the Gathering events? So anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.